Hey everyone, this is Chris.
And this is Lorenzo.
And welcome to Hacking Your Leadership, a Spreaker Prime podcast.
Thanks to all our Patreon members and our loyal listeners for tuning in today. Before we begin, here's a short message from a sponsor.
No role plays, just real. Chris and Lorenzo share 4 decades of combined experience to help you become a more effective leader.
We've never really, as a workforce, spent a lot of time on making sure we're developing good leaders.
We'll be able to share stories, experience, mistakes, failures, successes.
This is Hacking Your Leadership.
Welcome to Hacking Your Leadership. I'm Chris.
And I'm Lorenzo.
And Lorenzo, on this episode, we're going to be talking about the 4th element of 4 in our 4-part series, going over the Harvard Business Review article, Learning to Learn by Erika Andersen. 3 weeks ago, we talked about aspiration. 2 weeks ago, we talked about self-awareness. Last week, we talked about curiosity. And for the 4th element of things that you should have with you when learning to learn how to lead in a post-pandemic world is vulnerability.
Yeah, no doubt.
Yeah. For some people, maybe the toughest one. I think vulnerability in general is an element of leadership that is becoming more and more important with each passing day, regardless of what we think we know about being in a pre or current or post-pandemic world. Just being vulnerable as a leader will endear you to your people more than coming off as a person who just knows everything or is perfect. We know that. That's the obvious one. But why does vulnerability matter so much when it comes to learning how to learn? And that's why I think this is so important. So, do you think vulnerability is an element of you learning how to do something new or learning how to learn?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, the vulnerability piece and the way that it shows up is that from a leadership standpoint, like that you're out there learning as well, that you're out there letting people know that, hey, we're learning this together, or this is the first time, or, helping your team work through please give me feedback or your thoughts, on how I can get better. Like it's just this constant cycle of making sure that you're in spaces where your team gets a chance to see you take on new things and learn from them and learn from their ideas and learn from their strategies and sometimes be proven wrong. And many times just saying out loud that you are that you're struggling with something, that you're needing help with something. I think that was a big piece of, and I think we spoke about this a few times over this series here, but throughout 2020, leaders that were vulnerable, leaders that were saying things like, hey, you know what? Like, I'm not comfortable in this space, but I'm going to do my absolute best because you all need me in this space. I normally wouldn't talk about these things, but I want to talk about these things because even though I might not be able to understand them or I haven't experienced them myself, there are many of you out there that have, and I want a space for us to talk about so that I can learn, so that I can understand, so that I can better support you. And sometimes that just means giving you the platform to talk about these things and know that it's perfectly fine to be yourself and to share your thoughts and feelings. Like there's so many pieces to this that I think are so important. As you pointed out, they have always been so important, but even now they seem to be just rising to the top when it comes to how leaders are willing to lead by example in the fact that, that everybody's learning together and that we all, nobody's perfect and that we all have to take care of one another for all of us to be able to get better together.
I think vulnerability stands alone in this list of 4 things for one really important reason. And that's that it's the only one where a person's success or failure at doing it can be directly related to the kind of leadership they have above them. And, anybody can be self-aware, whether they are reporting to a great leader or a terrible leader. Anyone can be curious, whether they are reporting to a great leader or a terrible leader. And anyone can aspire to, learn new things, even if their leadership is not great. But I know that I have an easier time being vulnerable with my team if my leader is supportive of me being vulnerable, meaning if I don't get chastised for being vulnerable. So let's think about what the word actually means. What is a vulnerability? Well, when my dog rolls over on its back and exposes his tummy for me to scratch and rub his tummy, That's vulnerability right there. He's not in the fighting stance anymore. He's in a stance where he's saying, you can rub my belly, but you know what? If you wanted to take me out, you would be able to, but I trust that you're not going to. And that's what my dog does. We do the exact same thing. Being vulnerable simply means exposing something about yourself that could be used against you if the person you're doing that to doesn't have a good relationship with you, or wants to see you fail, or has it out for you, or isn't careful with your vulnerability. And I think when people are vulnerable and it is met with those things, it's met with, I'm going to take advantage of this. Oh, now I know something about Lorenzo that I can use to get ahead of Lorenzo, because now I have this kind of ace in my pocket here that, if it's down to him or myself, I know this one thing I can pull out, this card I can pull out, and he is vulnerable to this. So therefore I can kind of jump ahead at the end if I need to. If that's happened to you, you're much less likely to be vulnerable. You're much less likely to want to be vulnerable. And I think why this is so important when it comes to leadership is that your people need to see vulnerability from you, even if you are not in an environment where vulnerability is welcomed and rewarded from above. And that can be really difficult as a leader if you are in middle management. If you are a leader of people who also reports to somebody, this makes vulnerability much harder than the other three elements of learning to learn.
I think it's a great call out. And I think that it's, it reminded me a long time ago, a leader that said, basically control what you can control, right? You can't necessarily have control over those above you and what they do. You can understand, what the expectations are. You can kind of manage up to a degree. You can make sure that you inform them of the work that you're doing, but you really can't control those things. What you can control is how the people that report to you directly feel about the work they do, and they feel about you as a leader, and they feel about the way that you support them and that type of thing. So I think that it's a great, point to call out, because it is, to be able to go to a team and say something like, hey, I know that as your leader, I'm responsible and accountable for this work getting done, and for us making sure that we're meeting or achieving goals or exceeding goals. But let me be really honest with you. I don't have an answer here. I don't know exactly how we're going to do this, or I have some ideas and some thoughts, and some of these are probably going to be some bad ideas. Let me share them with you and tell me if they're stupid. And the first person who says that's stupid, you laugh, you go, thank you so much. Like, thank you for saving us. Thank you for saving me. Like, this is about us figuring this out together. It's so, like, even in those spaces where maybe it's not rewarded or it's not role modeled from those above you, as a leader of people, you still have that chance to actually do that for them in those spaces. And I think that it's so important to do that because I think to really get people to show up to the best of their ability and to show up as their unique selves, they have to know, to your point, that they can be their unique self and have it not be held against them. That they can be their unique self and they won't be judged, they won't be mocked for it. You to have a true inclusive, welcoming environment, you need people to show up as them. And for you to respect that, for you to appreciate that. And I think to do that, you've got to share things about yourself that are maybe unique or different or weird or for whatever the reasons are, and allow people to see you that way and for you to be yourself that way in front of them. And I think that is being vulnerable to a degree. When people can learn about you more than just your title, or more than or know about you more than just how they assume how they perceive you to be, because you're in this position of leadership or you have a certain title for the team.
Yeah, I think the one of the things that vulnerability is different. If we in last week on the episode about curiosity, I said that curiosity doesn't really count unless the potential outcomes could lead to some discomfort because they require you to change things about yourself. I don't think it's the same thing about vulnerability. Vulnerability is often described as uncomfortable. That there's discomfort involved in vulnerability, and I don't necessarily think that's true all the time. I think it is for a person who is being vulnerable for the first time. You're trying to figure out whether or not you can be vulnerable, whether or not it's going to be rewarded or you're going to be chastised for it. But on high performance teams with great culture, I don't think there's any discomfort with vulnerability anymore. I think that vulnerability is such a natural part of the business rhythm in high performance teams where there's great culture that it would be more uncomfortable to not be vulnerable, because that would lead to your team calling out like, what, wait a minute, why didn't you call this error out when you knew you made it, instead of letting it go further than that? That would be more uncomfortable at being called out. Being vulnerable about your mistakes and about your failures and about how you can get through things together as a team. Like you said, tell me where this is stupid and we can work through this together, because the goal is success as a team. When you have that kind of utopian state, I don't think there's any discomfort at all. And I think that sets vulnerability apart from some of these other things, even though a lot of times vulnerability is described as uncomfortable.
No, absolutely. And I think about so many times in cultures and industries and places where, this idea of leadership is that you have all the answers, or this idea of leadership is that, like never let them see you sweat and fake it till you make it. And, just as antiquated thoughts of and ideas of that all of a sudden magically overnight, if you get a job as a manager or as a leader, you now know everything about everything, or that the expectation should be that you know everything about everything. Like it's just it can be really difficult in those spaces when there's been so much done across organizations and industries for so long, to say that that's the way that you have to lead. It can be really difficult to flip that on its head. It can be really difficult to do that. I can think of times when I've been in large meetings with other leaders at the table, and clearly somebody has no idea what's going on. And like you can read it on their face. There's something that's happening. There's something that we're talking about. We're making commitments to. There's math on the board. I've been the person doing the math and talking about what needs to happen to get to here and there. And you can see it on somebody's face that they have no idea what you're talking about or how that happened. And you see it. So naturally you go to them and say like, hey, so Chris, you have any questions? And what does Chris say?
Nope.
No, I'm good.
I'm good.
I got it.
Yep, got it.
Yeah.
Yep.
and you're just like I can clearly see that you do not have it, right? But
it's the Chris Pratt meme. I have no idea what I'm doing here, and at this point, I'm afraid to ask.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. But it's for so many decades that like it's been taught that way, and like that those are the default answers. That it just causes so much damage, and it shows that the culture and the environment is not one that rewards vulnerability. It's not one that thanks people for saying, you know what, hey, maybe I'm the only one in the room here, but I don't understand this, or this doesn't make sense. Can you go over that with me again? And what's funny is that when somebody does that, and I've seen people do this, and this is great leadership that I've witnessed. I've seen leaders who actually know the answer, who actually understand it, who actually totally get it, that will raise their hand and ask the question because they know others in the room don't actually get it. And so they're willing to take that. They're willing to take that, okay, maybe they don't get it, just to help others in the room. And I don't know where that falls in maybe the element of vulnerability, but I love that behavior. Because it's almost like using vulnerability because you have maybe the respect or the trust of the team, or you know enough that people aren't going to look at you that way. You've built enough, with your own personal brand that you're like, I'm willing to tarnish my brand, even though it won't be tarnished. I'm willing to put it out there just to help others. I think that's a great move, and I think that has something to do with vulnerability. I don't know exactly what, but I like it.
Yeah, I like it too. I do think that it's a double-edged sword, though. So I like when leaders do that. I think it's a very a noble thing to do, because getting the answer out there is more important than not saying anything at all. But if you have to do it, if you're in a room where you feel like you have to do that as a leader, it should serve as a litmus test for maybe things could be better culturally in terms of your people feeling like they can be vulnerable to ask those questions. So why did the leader have to ask the question? Why can't it be somebody else, one of the people in the room who actually doesn't know the answer? And there could be a number of reasons for that, but if that's happening, it should be something you explore deeper. There's a famous story of Bethany Frankel, who is the creator of the skinny girl, the alcohol line, the margarita line, and she was in a TED Talk panel a few years ago where there were some other people on the stage and they were talking about something, and one of them used a term that was actually pretty well known to everybody in the panel and to many of the people in the room based on the type of people that were in the room, the industry they were in. And she didn't know what it was, and she interrupted the person talking in the middle of the TED Talk panel and said, "Sorry, I'm sorry. Hold on one second. What you said that word? What does that word mean? What does that word mean?" And they defined it. And it was clear that she was in the minority of people in the room who didn't know what that word was. But she understood that first, she wasn't part of that industry to begin with. So maybe there was a little bit less of an expectation for her to know that. But how many people do you know that would have done the exact same thing, that would have not known? Like I picture myself in the same situation and doing the whole, like, my hand on my chin, nodding in agreement to show that I know whatever things are going on. Like, yes, I see what you've done there. I like this, yes. And in my mind, I'm thinking, I'm lost completely. I'm just lost completely. And it's like, well, if I'm not expected to know because I'm not part of that world, there should definitely be no issue with me speaking up and asking the question. But even if I am expected to know, even if I'm in the room with people who are my peers, even if the fact that I don't know the answer already might point out a failure that I have done, or a lack of participation in something, or a lack of due diligence in something, even if that happens, that needs to be better than going forward without the right information and potentially making it be a bigger faux pas. And a lot of people put themselves in these situations where they feel like, well, I'm going to kick the can down the road because I think that I can find a way out of this in the long run and not have it become a bigger failure. And that's better. That risk is better than knowing that I'm outing myself now as being not in the loop, and then therefore people are going to judge me for that. I think that's the wrong way of doing things. But if a person feels compelled to do that, it means by definition that the leadership of that room or of that group is not supportive of the concept of vulnerability, is not supportive of this idea of inviting failure, because risk comes with potential failure, but risk also comes with potential reward. And it all goes together in terms of that culture you set up, where you say to your people, hey, you know what? I want you to stretch yourself. I want you to get better, but in order to stretch yourself, there's going to be failures along the way. And if you don't feel like you can do that, if you don't feel like you can be vulnerable in those failures and getting through this with myself as your leader and with the rest of your team, then you're never going to get better. You're never going to grow. And to some people, that's just the safe thing to do, but that's only in cases where the leadership is just really not supportive of this kind of culture.
Absolutely. And with that, it brings us this episode's 1 minute hack. But first, a word from a sponsor.
The 1 minute hack.
All right, for this episode's 1 minute hack, here's what I want you to do. Get out your pen and paper and write down every time in the last 6 months that you've started to do something new from a beginner's standpoint, meaning there was no expectation, you knew how to do it already. Everybody around knew that this was something you were doing for the first time, and so you could have complete freedom in knowing that you were just there to learn how to do it and get better, because the skill set you were trying to acquire would open up doors for you or be something that would make you a better leader. But you could have that vulnerability of not knowing how to do it because it was never an expectation to begin with. If you can say you've done that a whole bunch of times in the last 6 months, that's great. You already have the precursors or the pre-makings of being a person who's okay with being vulnerable. If you don't do that very often, that's not a muscle you exercise. And that means that when it comes to being able to admit when you don't know how to do something, especially something that you should know how to do, it's going to be much harder for you to do that. So start getting better at it when it comes to the things that you don't know how to do, and you'll, by definition, get better at being vulnerable around the things that you should already know how to do.
Yeah, I think it's a great 1 minute hack, and it's a great reminder, as far as becoming a good learner, is what are you learning and what are the things that are brand new to you, and are you proactively doing things to learn about things that you don't know anything about? And I think just that space of having yourself in doing those types of things over time, you'll start to question the things and get better at the things that you already know how to do, just because you're always looking at ways to improve. And I think I hear that a lot of analogy when it comes to things like martial arts or like jujitsu, where it's just like, the more that you learn, the more that you know about it, the more you realize you don't know and that there's other people out there to teach you something. And I think that overall, it's a great thing for leaders to do, is constantly not only get new content, develop yourself, but like start doing things and learning how to do things that you've never done before. And that will, I think, open your eyes to look at leadership in a very different way. And it will make sure that you're constantly checking yourself to develop yourself for your people for the better.
Yeah, I think that if there's one thing that this whole series has kind of brought to light, it's it's kind of a tongue-twisting title of learning to learn. And we don't think about that very often. How do we learn how to learn? And what we have done basically is we believe we know how to learn already. And that serves us well when everything is running like it should run, and the ways that we've taught ourselves how to learn can apply. When the world changes around us, somewhere along the line, our ways of learning how to learn no longer work. The things that you can ground yourself in as constants are these elements of aspiration, self-awareness, curiosity, vulnerability. Those are the constants. If you bring those with you, then any time you have to change how you learn, having those elements will mean that you can start from a standpoint of relearning how to learn again in whatever the environment is as you go forward. And that will be imperative if you want to lead people, especially over a long period of time. Maybe not so much over a 6-month period of time, but over a several year period of time, over a career, it becomes an imperative.
Absolutely. And with that, it brings us to the end of this episode. This is Hacking Your Leadership. I'm Lorenzo.
And I'm Chris.
And we'll talk to you all next time.